Part 37. The Incident of Taif. After a period of time without protection, the Prophet began searching for sustainable options outside Mecca. His reluctance to do so for so many years despite the increasing hardships truly demonstrates the prophetic method of patience and perseverance. The Prophet took inspiration from prophets before him, such as Prophet Nuh, who gave dawah to his people for 950 years. However, without protection, the Prophet's life was in imminent danger, and so hijrah was imperative. The closest prominent city to Mecca was Taif. Between tensions and peace treaties, the two competing cities enjoyed a love-hate relationship. The people of Taif were intimately aware of the people of Mecca, and vice versa. Taif was therefore an ideal base for the Prophet to explore. He took Zayd ibn Haritha and covertly traveled to Taif on foot so as not to arouse suspicion. They walked for 2 days and met with the leaders of Taif, 3 brothers who ruled the tribe of Thaqif in unison: Abd-Alil, Mas'ud, and Habib. The Prophet presented the message of Islam, but all 3 brothers rejected the call with utmost contempt, disrespect, and disdain. One of them replied,
"If Allah chose you to be a prophet, then I might as well tear down the curtains of the Kaaba in remorse."
The other added,
"Has Allah not found anyone better than you?"
The third mocked,
"I cannot speak to you because if you really are a prophet, you are too holy for me, and if you are a liar, then you are too beneath me to deserve a response."
Despite their insults and mockery, the Prophet remained dignified and responded, "Very well. If you have rejected my message, then at least do not inform the Quraysh of my visit." Note that the Prophet continued to cover his tracks. This does not contravene having trust in Allah, but rather is an implementation of how to trust Allah, namely, place your trust in Him and remain diligent. Even though the Prophet was rejected in the vilest manner, he remained in Taif for another week, spreading his message to the common folk. This provides invaluable insight into the prophetic methodology of dawah. The Prophet would always approach the elite class first, as they have most influence over society. That said, Allah made it clear on many occasions that the sincere masses are not to be ignored or neglected. One such example is in Surah Abasa.
He frowned and turned away because the blind man came to him, interrupting, "You never know. Perhaps he may be purified, or he may be mindful, benefiting from the reminder. As for the one who was indifferent, you gave him your undivided attention, even though you are not to blame if he were not purified." Surah 80, verses 1 to 7.
The prophetic balance is to first approach the elite of the society. If they accept Islam, the masses often follow suit. If they reject, effort is made to preach to the masses. Despite the Prophet's efforts, the masses also rejected the call, and no one converted. Eventually, there were some people who were warming to the idea, which worried the chieftains. In retaliation, they ordered mobs to physically attack the Prophet. They viciously pelted the Prophet, and although Zayd tried his best to protect him, they were both bloodied and bruised from head to toe. They escaped the city and continued until eventually they sat under a tree for shade and respite. Aisha once asked the Prophet,
"Was there a day more difficult for you than the day of Uhud?"
The Prophet immediately replied, "Yes, indeed your people hurt me greatly, and the worst of it was on the day of Aqaba." The Prophet is referring to the incident at Taif. He called it the day of Aqaba because it took place on a patch of land called Aqaba on the outskirts of Taif. On that day, I presented to Abd-Alil, Mas'ud, and Habib, and they did not respond to me in the way I wanted. I found myself in a state of grief and sadness, and I did not realize where I was until I reached Qarn al-Thalib, an area around 7 to 8 kilometers from Taif. Numerous benefits can be derived from the manner in which the Prophet answered the question. First, the fact that the Prophet described the incident of Taif as more traumatic than the Battle of Uhud, where he was physically injured and his life was threatened, indicates the severity of emotional distress. Even the Prophet acknowledged emotional pain as a bigger hardship than the ferocity of war. Second, the Prophet described what we would now refer to as disassociation, disconnecting from reality as a result of stress or trauma. This humanizing moment depicts the Prophet as a human in need of Allah's mercy, and great inspiration can be taken from this. Third, the Prophet described his situation in a dignified manner, not seeking sympathy. He would not have mentioned it had Aisha not asked, and he did not complain or victimize himself. We only learn through Zayd's narration that the reality was much harsher and that the Prophet indeed faced a truly traumatic ordeal. Instead, the Prophet reserved his complaints to the Almighty. When the Prophet escaped the mobs and finally found some shade to rest under, he began making one of the most profound supplications ever recorded. O Allah, to you I complain of my weakness and my humiliation before men. You are the most merciful of all those who have mercy. You are the Lord of the humble, and you are my Lord. To whom do you entrust me? To a stranger who receives me with hostility, or to a close relative you have given power over me? As long as you are not angry with me, I do not care, but your protection is easier for me. I seek refuge in your face by which all darkness is illuminated, and from which all the affairs of this world and the hereafter are rightly guided. May it never be that I incur your wrath or be subject to your anger. It is your right to criticize until you are content, and there is no power nor strength except through you. This beautiful, profound, emotional dua showcases a masterclass in how to converse with Allah. The Prophet establishes the etiquettes of complaining to Allah and how it differs from complaining to other people. There are two types of complaint. The former is the essence of tawhid, monotheism, whereby one complains to Allah, seeking refuge in Him and hoping for His sympathy. As Prophet Yaqub complained to Allah,
I complain of my anguish and sorrow only to Allah, and I know from Allah what you do not know. Surah 12, verse 86.
the latter is to reject the will or wisdom of Allah, questioning His decree. This form of complaint constitutes kufr, disbelief. Iblis himself is guilty of this, complaining,
My Lord, for allowing me to stray, I will surely tempt them on earth and mislead them altogether. Surah 15, verse 39.
The Prophet surrendered himself to Allah, expressing that he had no one to turn to except Him. He had no foreseeable option except his enemies, but then he stressed that as long as Allah is happy with him, he has no concerns. However, the Prophet then went on to mention that if Allah were to make it easier for him, he would prefer that. This clearly shows us that asking Allah for ease is permissible, and that one should not seek hardship. The Prophet showed that his priority was whether Allah was pleased with him, and his concern was not that he was bloodied and bruised, but whether or not Allah was angry with him. When the Prophet sat down for shade, he did not realize that the land belonged to his Qurayshi uncles, Utbah and Shaybah ibn Rabi'ah. They had witnessed his brutal expulsion from Taif and felt pity on their kin as well as a sense of tribal pride. They decided to gift him some fruits from their orchards. They sent their servant, Addis, who was an Iraqi Christian, with some grapes. The Prophet accepted the gift and said, Bismillah, in the name of Allah, before eating. Addis was intrigued.
What is this phrase?
The Prophet replied, This is something my Lord has taught me. Where are you from, O Addis? Addis replied,
I am from Nineveh.
modern-day northern Iraq. The Prophet smiled and said, From the city of Yunus ibn Matta, Jonas son of Matthew. Addis was stunned.
And how do you know Yunus ibn Matta?
Addis was a lone Christian in these lands surrounded by pagans with no knowledge of Judeo-Christian prophetic lineage. The Prophet replied, How can I not know Yunus? He is my brother. We are both prophets of Allah. As soon as the Prophet uttered this statement, Addis immediately began kissing the feet of the Prophet in adoration. His two masters, Utbah and Shaybah, looked from afar in bewilderment. When he returned, they shouted,
Woe to you! Why are you kissing his hands and feet?
Addis replied, O my masters, there is no one on earth better than him, for he told me things only a prophet could know. His masters responded dismissively,
Oh, Addis, he has bewitched you from your religion. Your religion is better than his.
Later on, when the Battle of Badr commenced, Addis was asked to fight against the Muslims, to which he responded,
You want me to fight that man who was sitting under the tree. By Allah, the mountains could not harm him.
In a truly bold move, he refused his master's command, who both met their death in the Battle of Badr. The Prophet described the following events. Allah sent a cloud to protect me and offer me shade, Jibril was in that cloud saying,
O Muhammad, your Lord has heard what your people have said to you and their rejection of you. He has sent me with the angel of the mountains to be at your disposal and do as you please.
I then heard another voice,
I am the angel of the mountains. Peace be upon you. O Muhammad, say as you wish. I am at your disposal. If you want, I can crush this city between these two mountains.
I replied, No. Rather, I hope Allah will extract from their progeny those who will worship Him without associating partners with Him. The symbolism of these events is clear. O Prophet, even if your kith and kin reject you, those furthest away will accept your message. Just as the dua of Musa was immediately answered as he sat under a tree, in reference to Surah 28, verse 24,
So he watered their herd for them, withdrew to the shade and prayed, My Lord, I am truly in desperate need of whatever provision you may have in store for me.
Exasperated and depleted, the Prophet's dua was similarly accepted. Allah provided physical respite through shade and luscious fruits, and spiritual respite through Jibril and the angel of the mountains at his command. While the Prophet's wounds were still fresh and his shoes were still soaked with blood, he had the option of revenge, yet he opted for the higher path, a prophetic path befitting of true nobility. The true miracle is that the Prophet still had the proclivity for mercy after being treated with such cruelty. The Prophet once again embodied his famous title of mercy for the whole world.
We have not sent you except as a mercy for the whole world. Surah 21, verse 107.
Less than 10 years later, Taif was conquered, and most of its inhabitants accepted Islam, including many who were alive at the time the angel of the mountains offered to destroy it. The very spot that the Prophet was brutally stoned on has now been turned into a mosque wherein Allah is worshipped throughout the day.